Thanks so much, Bill. I'd now like to introduce Mark Laskow, who is chair of the Carnegie Hero Fund Commission. Mark is also managing director of Gray Court and Company, and along with William Thompson, a great-grandson of Andrew Carnegie, Mark also co-chairs the Carnegie Hero Fund's Worldwide Committee. So please join us in welcoming Mark Laskow.
Well, thank you, Scott, and thank you, Bill. This really is indeed a culture palace that we're in. And it's wonderful that we can all gather here tonight and celebrate the life and legacy of Andrew Carnegie in such a wonderful space. And for me personally, it's also wonderful to gather here with the friends that we've made over the years in Carnegie World. It's a remarkable group. Thank you for coming. More than a century ago, Andrew Carnegie built a series of organizations in North America and Europe through which he intended to do nothing less than change the whole world and make it better. It was a pretty ambitious goal, but he was a pretty ambitious man. His building materials were ideas and money, and he built well. Today, of the 24 organizations that he created and endowed, 22 still survive. All of them are, I think, now more than 100 years old. His money was important to the project, of course, but his ideas were even more important. His ideas were powerful enough that more than a century later, they continue to attract professionals and volunteers alike to pursue them with all the zeal and imagination that Andrew Carnegie himself could have hoped for at the outset of the project. But are the ideas on which he built these organizations' goals still relevant today? I mean, it's been a long time. Here's one indication. As the centennial of his death approaches, over the next year, his organizations will gather at a half a dozen cities in North America and Europe to commemorate the man and the success of his still ongoing work. Tonight's the second of these gatherings. The first was in New York a few weeks ago. And others will follow in The Hague, Bern, Washington, D.C., Edinburgh, and then back to New York. Tonight, though, our event's going to be a little different than the others, and I'd like to explain how. So Andrew Carnegie was a man of big ideas, and he had a lot of them. Many of the organizations he created reflect that. For example, just to read the roll, not all of them, but the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, the Carnegie United Kingdom Trust, the Carnegie Institution for Science, the Carnegie Council for Ethics and International Affairs, the Carnegie Trust for the Universities of Scotland, the Peace Palace at The Hague, TIAA-CREF, he was involved in the creation of that, and of course the Carnegie Corporation of New York. Not to mention, tonight we have with us our friends from Carnegie Mellon University, the Carnegie Museums of Pittsburgh, and the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh. Now, these organizations, in general, deal with the broadest issues that face mankind. They affect entire countries and people through education, peace, health, science. But when Andrew Carnegie created the Hero Funds, he went to the other end of the spectrum. He designed them to focus on some of the most personal and intimate decisions an individual can be called upon to make. That is, to decide in a single instant whether to risk life itself to help another person in danger. Sometimes this kind of event occurs in physical isolation, in the wilderness or a lonely beach, and we do see those cases. But sometimes when an emergency arises, there is a crowd around, but still, there's only one person who steps out of the crowd, just that one person. And that person has to make that decision under the pressure of the emergency and the peril to the victim that leaves little time for analysis, much less reflection or consultation with friends. Our heroes, including each of the ones you'll meet here tonight, have this in common. In that moment of peril, each said, "I will." And then each one of them acted and put that decision into reality and put it all on the line. Now, while the decisions of many of our heroes may have been solitary, their decisions did have wider consequences. Certainly there were serious implications for their own families and for the families of the victims they sought to represent. You can easily see that. And we have tremendous examples of that here tonight. Sheriff's Deputy Billy Amy, who's sitting right here, he knows what Vicki Tillman meant to him. Ms. Tillman was driving by, saw something was happening, pulled over, and at the request of Officer Amy called 911. Now, most of us would agree that at that point she'd pretty much done her civic duty. Not enough for Vicki. She jumped on the attacker, got her hand on the attacker's hand on his gun, and held on until help arrived. To give you an idea of what Tillman and Amy were up against in this attacker, the arriving officers tased the attacker several times without effect. This was hard. For Deputy Billy Amy, Vicki Tillman's heroism meant that he's alive to join us in person tonight and to join us in honoring her courage. The second point is an observation made by my colleague, Sybil Veeder, who had great insight. But our unsuccessful rescues have a very special meaning as well, because they don't all succeed. Sometimes the victim dies in the attempt, and sometimes about 20% of the time, our rescuers die in the attempt. Jimmy Rhodes, who is over here, literally walked, you'll see this later, literally walked through a pool of fire to pull pilot Patrick Mahaney from the wreckage of his helicopter. I mean, sadly, Mahaney died from his injuries, but nevertheless, Patrick Rhodes accomplished this. This is hard to say, but when Patrick Mahaney died, he knew he wasn't alone. He knew that a stranger so valued him as a human being that that stranger walked through fire trying to bring him back to his family. And I think that was a gift to Jimmy Rhodes' wife, who is here with us tonight. I'd say I'm sorry. I've got it back to Patrick Mahaney's wife, who's here tonight. I'd say, I have a hard time. I'd say Jimmy Rhodes accomplished a lot with what he did. As moving as that is, though, these acts have another level of significance for all of us, for our culture and our civilization. It's interesting that America and Canada with it are sort of different countries in that they're not bound by ties of common ancestry so much, but rather not by the idea of a race or ethnicity. That's not what holds us together. Instead, we're bound together by a set of ideas and values set forth in our own founding documents. To me, the heart of these values is the statement in the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal. It's nice that I think that, but beyond that, Abraham Lincoln thought that too. That may be more important. In the Lincoln-Douglas debates in 1858, he noted that because of immigration, at that point, about half of the population were no longer, in his words, descended from the blood of our ancestors. That is the founding fathers, who he described as men of iron, the people who won our independence, built our nation, and crafted those founding documents that I referred to. These newcomers couldn't feel bound to the whole through blood lineage to the founding generation, but they could find a binding tie in the words of the founders in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Lincoln believed that through these words, recent immigrants could claim to be blood of the blood, flesh of the flesh with the founders. Those are Lincoln's words, and they're powerful words. The actions of our Carnegie Heroes are equally powerful. They're living proof that central principle still binds us. Think about what happens in the instant when a potential rescuer sees the danger threatening another human being. In that instant of peril, the rescuer recognizes that he and the victim in danger share an equal right to life. And then the rescuer acts on that recognition, steps in, and shares that peril with the victim. As I mentioned, 1 in 5 of our awardees have lost their lives in the attempt, and it's a very high price to pay for strangers. And they are mostly strangers who are no part of family or tribe. The actions of these heroes are the ultimate demonstration that all men and women, family, friends, and strangers alike, are equally entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, despite our current debates, one of our relative strengths compared to other countries in the world today is that we've been as good as any country at welcoming strangers to our cultures and values, even when many of these newcomers keep ties to their old cultures as well. Lately, though, our ability to assimilate newcomers has come under pressure on two fronts. First, and this is a practical issue, our immigrants are more diverse. When Lincoln spoke in 1858, the immigrants of whom he was speaking were German, Irish, French, and Scandinavian. That's what diversity looked like in 1858. Today, and this is great, we're receiving many people from the Middle East, North Africa, and South Asia, representing very different cultures. So when we introduce them to our culture, we simply have some more explaining to do. But second, there's along with this a deep philosophical debate within our country as whether our country and values are even worth selling to these immigrants. There's a lot of self-doubt about this. And it's fine, I guess, I puzzle over it, but for our politicians, pundits, and academics to debate the value of our traditional cultures and of our traditional culture and values. I don't have any idea what immigrants make of that debate, but there it is, because they chose to come here for a reason. But our newcomers can't help but notice the way that ordinary Americans help each other in ways that go across ethnic, religious, and social lines. Americans of great and ordinary wealth give prodigiously to help others. The Carnegie Corporation of New York, the Ford Corporation at one end of the spectrum, in the sort of popular philanthropy, the United Negro College Fund, or the Jimmy Fund at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. These newcomers can also see the individual actions of our heroes. They can see an A.R. Johnson rescue Wen Ting Huang from assault with an 8-inch meat cleaver. They can see an African-American, Wesley Autry, shield Cameron Holopater beneath an onrushing New York subway train. They can see a Timothy Mosher rescue Mana Mashun from a knife attack. And this pattern goes all the way back to the founding of the Carnegie Hero Fund. We forget, we're not doing anything new here. Everything we've done, everything we struggle with is really quite an old issue. The final trigger for Andrew Carnegie to create the Carnegie Hero Fund was a disaster at the Harwick mine, not far from here. And he particularly was struck by and honored two mining engineers who went to the rescue from other mines. They had no role in this, but they were volunteers, and they came and they died in the effort. These two mining engineers, Selwyn Taylor and Daniel Lyle, the rescuers who inspired Carnegie, were sons of the British Isles. But they died trying to rescue Hungarians, Poles, Italians, Swedes, and others. Now, so are our heroes outliers? Of course they are. That's why we give them the medal, right? But their extraordinary actions are a challenge to all of us to conduct our everyday dealings with our fellow citizens on the same moral basis. The values of heroism and altruism that shine through these acts are important threads in the overall fabric of our culture. The Hero Fund is determined to add the stories of these heroes to our national discussion about who we really are. And that's why we have gathered you here tonight. So thank you.